Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to Two Toe Tag's Metal Reviews and continuing our week of 7 black metal anniversary reviews. We are reviewing and celebrating 40 years of Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost. So, a classic album released in 1984. One of the, progenitors of the genre, really. This is an album that...
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'll say off the bat, listening to this album, you can hear the influence. You can hear a lot of stuff today, you can hear that in here.
Yes.
But what was interesting for me was that, like, hearing it for the first time, I'm thinking, wow, this is a lot more punk sounding than I would have expected.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because by musical definition, this album's not really black metal. It's basically old school thrash.
Yeah.
At the time, I think it was just categorized as extreme metal, but when musically, it's basically thrash metal, which is punk derivative. So it's not really black metal. What makes it black metal is more aesthetic and more of the influence it had on the genre going forward after this. So it's important to note it as a black metal release because it basically helped spawn the genre as well as death metal as well. It's basically one of those albums, and Celtic Frost is one of those bands that really was like the core, like the roots of a lot of genres that sprung out afterwards. So
for sure. So speaking of that aesthetic, let's talk about how the album starts with this intro track, Human. It sets a tone nicely. Like it
nicely.
Nicely in the sense of like this is something creepy, but this track is just literally like a 4-second loop of someone screaming. Like I even timed it, like it's 4 seconds until you hear it start again. So I'm like, okay, what the heck is this? I guess there's 2 saving graces about it. One, it's only 40 seconds, so...
Only 40 seconds.
Or only 40 seconds, so you don't have to bear with it for that long. But it actually transitions into the Crypts of Rays quite nicely. Like bleeds into that song, which is pretty cool.
So originally they were one track.
That makes sense.
Originally they were one track. They split them when it was like a reissue that came out a few years after, and they split the tracks so guys like me can just skip the first track and not have to listen to Human at all because it's pretty garbage. To be honest.
I got to a point where I was skipping it pretty consistently as well.
Exactly.
Like it was just not. I get where they're good. Like it's creepy, evil stuff, but it's just like this is annoying.
Yeah. Anyways, Into the Crypts of Rays though.
Let's talk to Into the Crypts of Rays. I was not ready for the energy that this song was gonna bring forth, and I really like the riff changes that they have, and then they go back to the original for the solo, which is cool. But like, there's a few different riff changes from multiple songs on this album like that. They're all cool. Like I put this album on, I'm like, yeah, this is cool, this is badass. It's the kind of album that you listen to and you're like, this is just some awesome metal. And what's really interesting, this album came out in 1984.
Yes.
It's celebrating 40 years. A lot of people, myself included, have complaints about a lot of old school black metal and even death metal sounding like basement tapes.
That's how you like to put it?
That's how I put it.
Yeah.
And it's just very low quality recordings, but these guys have this old album that sounds good. Like, literally, the drums sound great in terms of, if we're talking about the mix. Drums sound great. Guitars, this tone, I feel like, is a tone people try to replicate. I feel like the sound of this album is, these bands, they get into the studio, we want to sound like we just, like, got together in a garage, man. A lot of these bands, they walk into the studio thinking that way.
Yeah.
This is what they're trying to do, but they keep not doing it. And I think because you look at this band, you look at this album, no, it wasn't people forcing that sound, they just did it. A small thing, if we're gonna talk about the drums, the start of Nocturnal Fear, you can kind of hear the drummer like flub the intro a little bit. But it's fine, and he just keeps going, and it's fine. And that gives such a organic feel.
Yeah.
It really gives you a feeling that these guys got together, just the 3 of them in the booth or whatever, or wherever they recorded this album, and then just went. And I like that.
Yeah.
I think it's like, it's a case of like, there's small bits here and there where it's like, okay, what was that? But at the same time, it's not too much, it's not excessive, but it's enough to kind of get you really feel like it's like that raw, you know, no pun intended, human, sound, and I think that's really cool. I think they captured that really well, but they weren't trying to do it. I feel like it's just genuine. And a lot of bands are trying to do that and they're not capturing it.
You know what I think is interesting about that is we're listening to this on Spotify. And Spotify is often like the remastered, reissued version. Like I said, the first 2 tracks are split on this, which means it's not technically the original. So would it still have that sound and that type of presentation if you were listening to it on original vinyl or perhaps cassette tape, which is what it would have released on back at that time? It might have sounded more basement tapey kind of thing back then, but now that we're listening to it further down the line and it's kind of been maybe remastered a bit or whatever, maybe that's why it sounds so clean. But I do agree, it sounds really nice. The mix is good. It sounds really clean and polished.
Keep in mind though, there are a lot of old, recordings from this time and even after the time on Spotify that have
still sound grungy, yeah.
Exactly. So
I get it, yeah.
I think these guys just nailed it, to be honest.
I agree, yeah.
So if we're gonna talk about other individual songs,
well, we already knocked Human out of the park. Let's just get Dance Macabre out of the way.
Okay, so you know what? That track is an interlude. I think it would be great to open a show. They play that before the show starts, like they got some lights going on, you hear that track just to like hype up the concert.
Okay.
I feel like that would be the best use for that song. I would not use it as a 4-minute interlude on a short album. Because it's 4 minutes long of just like creepy sounds and noises, does not transition into the last track, unlike Human. Why is this 4 minutes? 4 minutes of just
I'm of the opinion tracks like this are made specifically for people that are tripping out, people that are on drugs and high. And the reason I think this is because I used to do drugs and I used to listen to music on drugs, and songs like this would just send you. Like if you're just chilling and you have headphones on and something like this comes on, you're gone. Like this is the thing that'll just make your mind start going in weird places. That's what it's designed to do. When you're listening to it sober, the first time you listen, you might go, okay, this is kind of creepy. It's long and it's weird, but what the fuck? Every time you listen to it after the fact, it's like, why is this even here?
Yeah.
It does not translate well to a sober mind. And I think that's the biggest problem. Now, if this track was 40 seconds like the intro track, way more forgivable. The fact that this is 4 minutes long,
it's longer than some of the actual
is
tracks.
Ridiculous. And just to put it into perspective, just in case you guys don't know, have never heard it, it's basically, what I think is happening is I think a man's being raped by a succubus. That's what I think is happening. So there's this guy, you hear sexual noises and grunting and orgasms and all kinds of weird noises and stuff like this. And it's just unnecessary. Like, I don't know what they were thinking, but obviously they thought it was a good idea to have that in there. Maybe it's padding. I don't quite know.
I just feel like the album would be better off without it. But what's weird is that you got these 2 tracks, like this intro track that's not very good. You got this interlude that's not very good, but the actual tracks themselves are a lot of fun.
They are. And just piggybacking off that, I guess, there's a 3-song stretch on this album that I think is phenomenal. And that's 3, 4, and 5. Visions of Mortality, Dethroned Emperor, and Morbid Tales. Now, Dethroned Emperor and Morbid Tales are also not original tracks on this album. They technically are, but they also aren't. It's a little bit weird how this works. So, the album was released as an EP originally in Europe, and then when they released it in North America, shortly after, they added those 2 tracks to make it full LP length, and they call that the full LP.
So you're telling me that Dance Macabre was part of the EP?
Yes. Yes. And so is Human, but Human was tied, into the Crypts Arrays.
Yeah.
The band does recognize the American release as their debut album. So they count it as their LP. They don't really count the earlier released EP as their debut. But I just think it's kind of cool that Dethroned Emperor and Morbid Tales are 2 of my favorite songs, and they're the ones that were added after. So these songs, the coolest thing about these songs is when the double bass turns on, the energy and the attitude of them just cranks up.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
And
it's like like any time in the album when it does that.
Yeah, and I just really love how the bass drum has a real punchy, compressed feel to it. It really has like a thud to it.
Yeah.
Really satisfying to listen to. And I like how songs like Visions of Mortality, they change up their pace, giving it a bit of a progressive feel, kind of going back and forth with different not time signatures, but just different tempos, I guess.
Yeah, like you got a slow groove, and then in the middle, out of nowhere, they bust into a fast one. It's like, whoa, where'd this come from?
Exactly. And, that stuff's always cool to listen to. Dethroned Emperor, I think, has the best riffs on this album, though, man. Such deadly riffs on this song. Really cool stuff. And
The oh in the intro.
Yeah, there's another one at the end too.
Yeah.
Right. So these little like vocal ad lib screams, really cool stuff. And Morbid Tales, the title track. Back then, this was like amongst the heaviest stuff that music had to offer. Like, it was riding that line. It just has great forward-moving energy, and as simplistic as it is in its form and its presentation, it's really impossible to listen to it and not feel a sense of gratitude for what it did for the genre.
Yeah,
that's how I
that's a
feel
good way
when
of
I'm
putting
listening
it.
to it, right? I'm listening to it, I'm going, this fucking set a ball in motion, right? Or this was one of them, one of the songs/albums that set a ball in motion that just sprouted into such beautiful stuff and what we know as metal this day, right? So there's a sense of gratitude that I feel with listening to that. Just to add to those three songs, I think the last song on the album, Nocturnal Fear, is also really good in that same regard. The riffs, you could just hear how inspirational these riffs are. When I listen to bands today, I hear a lot of this stuff in bands of today, like maybe not even bands of today, but bands that have been around for a while. Anthrax, Cradle of Filth, Obituary, Marduk. There's a billion bands that like you're listening to them and you're going, oh yeah, this is where they got it from, or this is where their inspiration was from, right? So like Return to Eve, for example, has that female soliloquy, that little bright part.
That part was pretty
Cradle of Filth does all kinds of stuff like that. Where'd they get it from?
Right here.
Chances are it was right here, right? So I just love when you listen to an album like this. It's 40 years old, and you kind of come full circle and you get an understanding of this is where it started. This is where the inspiration for all the other bands that I love, this is where they got it from. A lot of them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off about the title track, I feel like that song has everything that's cool about the album. Like, if I were to show if someone were to ask me, like, in one song, show me what this album's like, I'd show them that one. Because it has the cool screams, the double kick, the mean slow groups, the fast ones, the screams. It literally has everything that I enjoy about this album is just put into that song. So it's just crazy to consider that I wasn't originally on the first release of it. But awesome, awesome song. I like that one a lot. So, how about we get to rating this album?
Okay, that's fine. I'm ready to rate it. So, when it comes to its purpose in the genre, its fundamental purpose, this album, there's really, it's solidified in that regard. But as far as reviewing the album, it takes a few hits. And it's unfortunate it has to take a few hits. Human and Dance Macabre, these are stains on the album no matter how you look at them. And unfortunately, it's going to affect the score. Out of the remaining 7 tracks, I like 4 of them. The other 3 tracks I think are okay, but they don't really do a lot for me, and they don't really have any really standout notable parts. So with all that considered, the score I'm giving this album is lower than I would like to give it, but it's based on a scoring method, and this is where it landed, but it's a 6 out of 10. Which I think is fine, but I think the biggest factor is those 2 tracks. They basically
Drag it down.
They drag it down like an anchor, right? So if it wasn't for those tracks, if Dance Macabre was, a little bit shorter, a lot shorter.
A little bit.
And, or maybe had some instruments in it or something like that.
Something.
It might have been a little bit, to bump it a little higher. But yeah, either way, I think it's a solid classic album that everybody should check out. But yeah, it's a 6 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with a lot of what Vile Self said here about this album. Those two, the intro and the interlude really, they drag this album down, but I feel like the rest of the content of this album is great. I feel like it's the kind of album that I could see myself coming back to if I just want some kick-ass metal, maybe some of the punk or early thrash vibe. But as you said, this album is a cornerstone of the genre. It meant a lot for the genre itself. Reviewing it, I did enjoy it, but based on our scoring method. It's unfortunately not going to get my toe tag, but it's going to get a 7 because this is still a solid album that I suggest anyone check out.
So that's it. That's our review of Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost. You guys, that was a 7 from TV Fish and a 6 from myself. Leave your thoughts and comments down below and let us know what you guys think of this album after 40 glorious years and what it's meant to you as a metalhead. And maybe tell us what you would have given this album if you were to score it as well. But that's it for this video. So subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. I'm Vile Self.
I'm TV Fish.
I'll see you guys on the next one.